Hi, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. Indigenous Services Canada says it has no timeline to address a backlog of approximately 140,000 requests for Jordan's Principle, including approximately 25,000 self-identified urgent cases. The Canadian Human Rights Tribunal had ordered Canada to identify the number of backlog cases and prepare a detailed plan to address them. Indigenous Services says it will continue to process urgent requests where there is a possibility of irremediable harm to First Nations children. The department says it will pay out more than 150,000 claims by the end of the year. That's 80,000 more payments than what were made in all of 2019-2020. Indigenous Services says it is reassigning resources and focusing on service delivery, among other things, to address the backlog. And we'll have more on Jordan's Principle tonight when we speak with child advocate Cindy Blackstock. A Cree doctor from Alberta tells APTN News the nurse who cut the braids of a late Pasqua First Nation elder should be fired and charged with assault. Earlier this year, 84-year-old Dexter Adams was staying in Edmonton's Royal Alexandra Hospital when his family discovered that his braids, his eagle feather, and his bear grease had been thrown into the garbage. Adams, who is a day school survivor and lived with dementia, was in hospital waiting for a space to open in a long-term care facility. He died just a month later. Alberta's Health Services said the incident was, quote, deeply regrettable and should never have happened. And it has now taken a number of steps to better train its staff. Dr. James McCocus says systemic racism is embedded in Canada's healthcare system, and only strong action will change people's behavior. In a statement, Dr. McCocus added, what I think might be helpful is for families in the health system itself to take an approach that uses the justice system in instances like this and charging workers with assault. There needs to be policies and procedures with consequences for those who don't follow them. The family hasn't considered a lawsuit yet, but did request nurses' notes to understand what happened. However, the notes were redacted around the time Adam's hair was cut. To read more on this story done by our Leanne Sanders, you can go to our website, aptnnews.ca. To the East Coast now, where a Department of Fisheries and Oceans veteran officer has been suspended for 10 days without pay. That's after leaving two Mi'kmaq fishers stranded late at night without boots or cell phones. The incident happened last March in southwestern Nova Scotia. 3 DFO officers arrested Kevin Hartling and Blaise Silliboy for harvesting elvers near Shelburne, Nova Scotia. The officers confiscated the fishers' phones and boots and drove them to a nearby gas station. Hartley and Silliboy walked along a highway for hours before they borrowed a phone and were picked up by a friend. Because of this incident, Federal Fisheries Minister Diane Leboutillier offered an external review last July to eradicate potential systemic biases or racism. Kevin Hartley told APTN News his belongings still have not been returned. On Tuesday night, the Senate passed a bill that would restrict solitary confinement in federal prisons. The federal government has committed to limiting the practice in the past, but this time Senator Kim Pate's bill she's the co-sponsor of a bill that hopes the House of Commons will pass into legislation and solitary confinement phased out once and for all. APTN's Fraser Needham has that story.
The bill is called S-230, or Tona's Law, after Tona Mills. And Senator Kim Pate had this to say about her at a press conference in Ottawa on Wednesday morning.
The horrific reality is this is an Indigenous woman who went through 10 years of isolation and then had to be in the mental health system for another almost 11 years. And has been free and clear of the system for just less than 1 year and then diagnosed with terminal cancer. And so she said that she hopes before she dies she sees a law that would prohibit what happened to her.
The proposed legislation would require prison authorities to seek court approval to isolate an inmate longer than 48 hours, allow prisoners to seek reduced sentences or greater parole eligibility where segregation made their sentence harsher, and prohibit isolation for inmates dealing with mental health issues. According to statistics accompanying the bill, Indigenous people make up 44% of those in segregation, and Indigenous women 96% of females in segregation. Pate says her bill would build upon regulations in 1992's Corrections and Conditional Release Act.
At that time, it was a piece of human rights legislation aimed in particular at helping ensure that people who should not be in prison weren't there. Section 29 says people with mental health issues and health issues should be in health settings. This bill, Bill S-230, helps push that along.
The NDP's Blake Desjardins is the legislation's other co-sponsor. He says he is hoping for cross-party support so the bill can pass through the House as quickly as possible.
Solitary confinement doesn't work. It harms people. It creates a longer life of pain. We need to see a kind of future where our justice system is restoring people, is helping them reintegrate into community.
There is no date yet set when Bill S-230 will be introduced in the House of Commons. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
For more on Tona's Law, Creason spoke with Senator Kim Pate.
Senator Kim Pate, thanks for taking some time for us. We heard a little in Fraser's story about Tona Mills, but can you tell us about her and how you came to know her?
Sure. Well, Tona is now 52. I met her when she was 19, just coming into the system before she was in the federal system. She's a 60 scoop survivor. She had been in child welfare. She'd been in the youth system. She was in the adult system. And why we named Tona's Law after her is because she spent nearly, over 10 years in isolation in federal penitentiaries. As a result of that, she developed what was diagnosed by the psychiatrist in the mental health system in Nova Scotia as isolation-induced schizophrenia. And then it was about 11 years in that system before she was able to come out into the community. And when the Senate, I've been in touch with her over the years, saw her every few months. She knew my children. My kids are now grown up. When we were doing the human rights study on the human rights of federally sentenced persons, we visited her in the psychiatric unit in the hospital where she was. And one of the things she said to me and the other 3 senators from our Human Rights Committee who were there was, she talked about what had happened to her, the horrific treatment she received at the hands of corrections, at the hands of even psychologists in the prison system, and asked us to please, if we could, pass a law. Well, we asked what we could do, and she said, please pass a law to stop this from ever happening to someone again. Well, around the same time, the government was deciding, as a result of some court cases challenging the use of segregation and solitary confinement, they brought in a new law in 2019, Bill C-83 it was called. It basically just renamed segregation, though, and took away some of the limited oversight, legal oversight that existed. And so with the late Senator Foray Singh, a Métis senator from here in Ontario, we worked on, a number of other senators as well, worked on amendments to that bill. And initially, even though the Senate voted on them and the government rejected a bunch of them, we voted to send it back. And basically the long and the short is, in the end, the government did not adopt a number of the amendments. But Senator Foray Singh and I and a number of other senators started going into the prisons to monitor what was happening. At the same time, the correctional investigator was monitoring, and the ministerial advisory committee that was set up was monitoring. We all came to the same conclusion. Basically, what the government said they were going to do was not being done. Money that they had been given to contract with beds in mental health resources in provinces and territories had not been contracted. Mental health advocates from outside the prison system hadn't been hired. And the very oversight mechanisms they put in place weren't being listened to. So the independent decision makers, their decisions weren't being followed. And so we worked on this legislation, and decided to call it Tona's Law because of her request to us to end the use of segregation. And basically, it passed the Senate last night. This morning, Member of Parliament, Métis senator from, Métis member of Parliament from Edmonton, Griesbach, has taken it on, and hopefully it'll go through the House of Commons now. Tona, when I talked to her last night, she called me right after the vote. She was crying. She is dying, actually. She, within a year, sadly, of being released from all of the systems, and for the first time in almost 3 decades being free in the community, she has now been diagnosed with terminal cancer. And so she's been told she has 6 to 9 months. Well, in September, she was told she has 6 to 9 months to live. And her wish is that this becomes law, so that before she dies, she knows that she had some small part in trying to help prevent what happened to her from happening to others. The bill, in addition to putting in oversight mechanisms, in addition to trying to deter corrections from using solitary confinement in all kinds of variations, regardless of what they call it, also requires them to actually look at some of the mechanisms that would allow people with mental health issues, as well as Indigenous people, to be released into their communities with supports to be held accountable in their communities. And so that's something that really should have been done back in 1992 when the law was first passed, but has really been interfered with and subverted by the way the government implemented those. So there are a number of provisions. It also provides a remedy where the way that corrections treats people amounts to them breaking the law themselves.
Senator Pate, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you for speaking with us on this.
Thank you very much, Creason, and thank you to APTN for all the incredible work you do, and happy holidays to everybody.
Breaking news at this hour on the future of the Southern Chiefs Organization. Grand Chief Jerry Daniels. We'll bring you that and more coming up after the break. Welcome back. An update now to the situation involving the Grand Chief of the Southern Chiefs Organization, Jerry Daniels, a story APTN first told you about last week. The Southern Chiefs Organization have just released a statement saying that Daniels is on leave for an undetermined length of time for health reasons. Chief Cornell McLean of Lake Manitoba First Nation will remain as acting chief in his absence. The statement did not confirm Daniels was involved in an altercation outside an Ottawa bar. The SCO says that business as usual for the programs, it will be business as usual for the programs and services provided within the organization. The City of Winnipeg unveiled its 2025 budget on Wednesday. The budget focuses on stabilizing city finances, investing in public safety, and repairing roads. The city plans to increase property taxes to by 5.95%, up from 3.5% from last year. The increase will help fund roads, public safety initiatives, and essential services. Among that is the city hiring 36 new police officers and 15 community safety officers over 2 years, and dedicating $1 million to youth recreation programming to prevent crime. The 2025 police budget now stands at $339 million, up $6 million from 2024. The budget speech did not specify any Indigenous commitments. Despite his campaign promise to limit property taxes, Mayor Scott Gillingham defended the increase.
That we remain really one of the most, if not the most affordable major city in all of Canada for which to live. But it's just impossible at a time when the city is growing by 65,000 people in 3 years, and inflationary pressures have been up over the last several years, and we're still impacted by the effects of COVID. It's just impossible to keep property taxes at low levels. There comes a time where we have to have a modest increase. This is the year to do that.
The Canada Post strike is having an impact on millions of Canadians across the country, but that also includes First Nation communities that rely heavily on Canada Post to receive some of their essentials. CTV's Alex Karpa has more on the remote communities trying to cope.
For those living in rural and remote First Nations communities, the Canada Post strike is hitting hard.
I have seen a 70% dip in sales this week.
Business owner Mariah Batiste is struggling to keep up.
I feel like we've been at such a disadvantage as a small business and in an Indigenous community where these UPS and FedExes are an hour away from where we are located. So it's a huge hit for me financially.
And it's not just businesses in First Nations communities that are hurting. The Assembly of First Nations says the strike is delaying much needed supplies of medicine and other necessities to those that urgently need it.
It's really inconvenient, and it's really hard for a lot of people that cannot get their medication any other way.
Those living in rural and remote communities say if the strike continues, it could exacerbate health conditions for many.
Worsened health conditions may lead to surgeries. The major concern is that our people may lose limbs or their lives.
Chief Richard Hart says the strike shows just how much First Nations communities rely on Canada Post.
When you're an isolated community, you really depend on the postal station to deliver vital things.
The union is seeking wage increases, a cost of living allowance, and more job protection. But Canada Post says the latest proposals between the two sides have not closed the gap. Alex Karpa, CTV News, Winnipeg.
Jody Wilson-Raybould has a new book on the way. We'll hear from her after the break. Welcome back. Here's a look at your current conditions. 10 in Halifax, sunny, and 3 in Fredericton. -4 with snow in Kuujjuaq, 0 in Nain. 0 in Montreal, 13 below with snow in Val-d'Or. -4 in Sault Ste. Marie, cloudy, and 15 below in North Bay. -23 in Thunder Bay, cloudy, and -28 in Sioux Lookout. -22 with snow in God's Lake, 32 below in the Pas. -26 in Winnipeg, -33 in Brandon. 29 below in Regina, -26 in Saskatoon. -37 in La Ronge, 39 below in Stony Rapids. In northern Alberta, -11 with snow in High Level and Fort McMurray. -4 in Edmonton and Lethbridge. 6 above in Vancouver and Campbell River. -1 with snow for Prince George and Smithers. -7 in snow in Old Crow, 11 below in Whitehorse. -14 with snow in Yellowknife, 25 below in Flurries in Norman Wells. -22 in Sax Harbor, 21 below in Paulatuck. 19 below for Chesterfield and Whale Cove. -22 in Resolute, 25 below in Arctic Bay. Our Tina House had a chance to sit down with Jody Wilson-Raybould, the first Indigenous woman ever elected into Parliament that became the Attorney General of Canada back in 2015 and was elected again as an independent in 2019. Now she's a best-selling author.
Thank you. We are incredibly honored to have the one and only Jody Wilson-Raybould here in our studio in North Vancouver. Jody, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
This is exciting. This is your 4th book, Reconciling History. Please tell us a little more about your latest book.
Yeah, I'm really excited. For this book, I worked with a very close friend and colleague of mine, Roshan Danesh. It's entitled Reconciling History, A Story of Canada. And what we sought to do was to tell an oral history of this country, told through the voices of the many, Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, as opposed to the few, which I think many of us have heard history told by the few. And the book is structured around many different voices from various time periods in Canada's history, and the parts are framed around a totem pole that was raised in my grandmother's village that speaks to the legacy of colonialism, but also speaks to the history and the lineage and the traditions of my people, the Muskama Tawadena people.
Wow, incredible. Tell us what you've been up to besides writing books.
Oh, well, writing books has preoccupied a great amount of my time, but I have the great fortune of working with many people with Indigenous communities around governance and rebuilding nations. But I also have the opportunity to travel a lot throughout the country and speak to many diverse communities, to industry, to various government bodies, and in Indigenous communities, speaking about leadership, speaking about politics, and speaking about how we can all work to advance true reconciliation.
Amazing. Jody, I've known you for a number of years now. I've met you when you were not in politics, and then when you first got elected as regional chief here in BC, and then you moved forward to becoming the Attorney General of Canada. What have you learned from your experience in that high level of politics?
Oh gosh, yeah, it seems like a long time ago when we first met, and I had the great honor of being elected in 2009 as the regional chief for British Columbia, and through to being elected as an independent member of Parliament and serving as the Attorney General. What have I learned? I've learned that in order to create change, in order to advance reconciliation and advance the recognition of Indigenous people's rights or any other issue that's incredibly important in this period of time, is that you have to work incredibly hard. And in politics, I think the most important thing anybody can bring to politics, well, things I should say, is speaking the truth and acting with integrity. And for me, I think that's in short supply right now. And so when we see people that want to put their names forward and run for elected office, people that want to accomplish goals and advance agendas, including advancing the rights recognition agenda of Indigenous peoples, I gravitate to those people and want to support them.
Amazing. Would you read a passage for us out of your book?
Sure. Well, as I said, this is we seek to tell a story of Canada through the voices of Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples to be able to tell a shared story or a true story. And so there's many, many different voices. And after we finished writing, almost completing this book, I came across a quote by George Erasmus, whom you know, a former national chief and also a commissioner for the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. And it really encapsulates what we're seeking to do with this book. So George Erasmus says, "Where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. Where community is to be formed, common memory must be created." And so that's what we're seeking to do for people that pick up the book, is to read a little bit more into our history, into the different worldviews that make up this country now called Canada.
And we will bring you the rest of that interview with Jody Wilson-Raybould on tonight's newscast. That is all the time we have for your first look at the day's news. You can stay up to date with the very latest, including the latest on the Grand Chief of the Southern Chiefs Organization, who is now on leave, by visiting our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy McGuitch, thanks for being with us. Creason will be back here at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.